District 115 Board of Education meeting for November 8th, 2011. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Snoblin?
Here.
Mr. Edson?
Here.
Mr. Black?
Here.
Mr. Scribner?
Here.
Mr. Bergner?
Here.
Mr. Carey? Mrs. Golan?
Here. Thank you. First on the agenda is the President's report, and just a couple of things. First of all, I really want to congratulate all of our students and their performance both academically and athletically the past few weeks, and I'm sure Jay will be speaking to that. But it's been so exciting, and the school spirit and the team spirit and the participation by the community has been a lot of fun. So Jay, please pass that on. It's been a joy. On another note, we've been receiving questions about the status of our negotiations with our teachers union, and I'll just bring you up to date as far as I can at this point. We began a process, as you know, in last April, and the union was only willing to meet with the board once over the summer months. So we returned to negotiations in late August, but after only 2 meetings, the union requested we move to mediation. So at our mediation session last night, at the union's request, we presented final offers. The union did not accept our offer, and so now we are at an impasse. The board would like to underscore the reality of our financial situation and our commitment to our students, our teaching professionals, and the educational program. First and foremost, the Board of Education would like to emphasize that we are committed to maintaining highly competitive salaries and benefits, protecting class size, protecting educational offerings and extracurricular programs, and restoring our budget reserves. So what is it we're offering? In the near future, the Labor Board will allow us to share the detail of the board and the union's final offers. At this point, we will demonstrate to you in detail that under our current proposal, our teachers' compensation is and will remain at the highest competitive level in the state. Furthermore, our proposed offer will not reduce teacher salaries, will not reduce retirement benefits, will not eliminate salary schedules or steps. It will keep insurance benefits and contributions in line with comparative districts. It is a 4-year agreement, and it allows the district to restore its fund balances over a 4-year period to recommended levels. This is critical during the challenging economic times that we are seeing now. Please keep in mind our district, along with school districts across the nation, is in financial crisis. We have worked hard to manage the following revenue shortfalls, which have included a sharp decline in revenues from new construction, a sharp decline in interest income, and a delay in payments from the state of Illinois. At the same time, we have honored the most recent 5-year contract, which was negotiated prior to the economic downturn, of average teacher salary increases of 5.5% annually, including a 6.1% average salary increase in 2011. How have we met our expenses? The board has met expenses through a combination of reductions, increased non-tax related revenues, froze all non-union salaries, and drew down our budget reserves. Our current reserves are well below board targets, and continuing to draw down the reserves is not an option. To meet the demands of the union's current proposal, the district would need to consider all or some of the following: further reductions in staff, increases in class size, and/or reductions in educational offerings and extracurricular activities. The board is not willing to implement these measures, as they will have a direct impact on our students and on our educational programs. Are we confident in our proposals? Yes. All of our analysis is based on the district's audited financial data and already reported Consumer Price Index, the CPI, statistics. Our data is accurate and complete. The Board Finance Committee reviews the district's financial projections on a regular basis. This committee is comprised of community experts, board members, and administration. Be assured that the board remains committed to supporting our dedicated and professional faculty members. However, it is imperative that we maintain a conservative, long-term approach to district finances, especially during the current economic downturn and uncertain funding from the state and federal sources. We will keep you informed about this important process. Thank you. Thank you for your questions and your emails. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Griffith for the superintendent's report. Later.
Okay, Madam President, members of the board, and members of the audience, thank you for being here tonight. Just a few announcements. First of all, I'd like to encourage all and any who can attend the holiday concert and spaghetti dinner on December 11th. It's the instrumental concerts at 3 o'clock at Lake Forest High School auditorium. The choral concerts at 7. The spaghetti dinner part occurs, starts at 4:45. I also would like to, and Jay's going to help me do this a little bit, what a wonderful fall season we've had with our students. President Golan mentioned that our debate team has had very successful experience this fall. I know winning at least one tournament. Our boys golf team was 2 years in a row the Class 3A state champions, very proud of that. And Joe Willis was the state medalist, so #1 golfer in the state of Illinois. So kind of a shout out to Joe and his family and his teammates. What a great job. But not just that, congratulations to the varsity girls hockey team and flag football teams, because each placed second in the state just a couple of weekends ago. So that's pretty exciting. If not first, how about second in the state? Our varsity football team was conference champions this year. And I'm not sure anybody can recall within recent memory beating Stevenson, Warren, Libertyville at the same time, in the same season rather, I'm sorry. So that's pretty exciting. Being conference champions for the Suburban Conference title, first time since 1995. So again, congratulations to the team and all the hard work that went into that. Our varsity girls volleyball team was conference champions. Our girls swim and diving team was just once again conference champions. Our boys soccer team were conference champions. Our girls tennis team were sectional champions and took 8th in state. We had some individual award winners also in cross country. Jay, did I miss any other part of that?
Our girls volleyball team also won the regional and had 32 victories, which I believe is a school record.
Oh yeah, that's right, and lost in an incredibly close match after beating Stevenson in what, super sectionals, was that it, or sectionals?
Sectional final.
Yeah, sectional finals. Beat Stevenson twice and then lost in the sectional finals to a third. It's hard to beat anybody a third time, so congratulations to the girls. Anything else from Lake Forest High School to the board, Jay, to share right now?
No, I think that the drama program at Lake Forest High School is robust. We finished our junior-senior play, which was almost Maine. It starred 14 really wonderful actors and actresses and a whole bunch of really great kids in the tech crew. Really proud of the Joe Pulio production that took place. Recently have had choral concerts, orchestra concerts, and band concerts. Not only have we done that with the middle schools and had all of the middle schools over to our auditorium to perform with and rehearse with, and then nighttime performance with our students, but also we brought the North Shore band, symphonic band, which is an adult band, really robust band. They performed in an auditorium, and a guest conductor from Northwestern took our students through a really wonderful program to get them to feel what it's like to really have a college Northwestern style instructor getting them to do things beyond their capabilities. And that concert that night was really wonderful. So I know Harry was there, and he can speak to that too. Really in good shape at the high school. We're winding down our first quarter, and that's kind of in the bank. We're heading towards the holiday break at Thanksgiving, so we're looking forward to that.
Board members, I did attend the play, and I also went to the fall concerts. One really marvelous thing about what our high school staff did was to integrate their concerts with the two middle schools. So Lake Bluff Middle School and Deer Path Middle School, choral groups, orchestra, and were at the school with the high school students, and really did I think the best ever in terms of just jointly working on projects together, musical projects. So it was really excellent. I also would like to do a little shout out to 3 of our board members because, by the way, there's a new law that's being implemented starting next year where all board members are required to go through annual training in best practice for, just as teachers do and administrators. Now there's a training requirement for all board members. So we have Monty Elson and Nikki Snoblin and Sharon Golan attending the state annual conference for board member training, as well as superintendent and school business official. And that's coming up on November 18th and 19th. So for the 3 of you attending, congratulations. Other board members, there'll be other opportunities coming up also. That concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Griffith. At this time, we have public participation. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the board on a matter that is not on the agenda? You can be recognized. Okay, then I am going to suggest, because I know there were questions from some people ahead of time and also from some board members, that I'll let the board members be our public. And if you have any questions about what I said during the president's report, any questions about negotiations and how that's going now, why don't you ask your questions, and maybe I can ask Mr. Albus if he's got any information in front of him he can answer, or Dr. Griffith. So starting with Dick, did you?
Yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
Regarding our teacher pay scale, there's been a lot of discussion about the desire to continue to be able to attract and retain the highest quality teachers that we possibly can at the high school, and obviously pay scale is related to that. Alan, can you address where we stand competitively in that regard now? And well, let me stop right there. Can you address where we stand now competitively in terms of our teacher pay scale?
One of the things we do every couple of years is a lifetime earnings calculation where we take an assumption. So if we hired somebody at a BA 0, which is the very beginning salary, and they progressed over a 34-year career, and every few years got more educational experience, so they had what's called lane changes, how would that look? And how much money would be earned over a career? Then we take those exact same assumptions and apply them to most of our benchmark districts. And I would point out our benchmark districts are at the top in the state as far as compensation goes, and also in performance. So in the FY11 schedules that we did that, we exceeded all of our benchmark districts. And you have to do an analysis like that because salary schedules are a matrix of compensation based on years and educational experience. So depending on where you pick and choose, it's really hard to look at that on an apples-to-apples comparison. So by taking the same progression through a schedule and apply it, it gives us a snapshot based on a current year schedule where we are. In FY11, we are at the top.
By FY11, you mean the fiscal year ending June 30th, 11?
Correct.
Last year?
Correct.
Okay. And this year, let's assume nothing, status quo, nothing changes, for us at least. I think things are changing. Other districts where contracts are in place and what have you. Would there be any material change to that first place ranking?
Doing that same analysis on using our FY11 schedule compared to FY12 schedules,
Right.
New Trier would go ahead of us. We're virtually tied with Stevenson over
Right.
that analysis.
New Trier would go ahead of us by some small incremental amount or some large?
Oh, I think it was $50,000 or $60,000 over a career, so that's over a 34-year career.
Over 34 years? Okay. So not a material difference if you
No.
look at the base? Okay. So, again, it's your assessment that at the current time we're the highest paying district in the state in terms of pay scale? Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And we will essentially maintain that even if nothing were to change?
Well, being on the team, I know what we've talked about. Yes, we are going to remain. It's all about attracting and retaining. Yes, we are going to stay highly competitive.
Thank you.
Any other board members who have questions?
I have a quick one, a bit of an explanation. President Golden mentioned in her report that in fiscal 11, so the year ending June 30th, 11, that our teachers received a 6.1% increase. At the same time, and in that same year, well, let me ask a question first. Roughly what percentage of our funding comes from property taxes?
About 80%.
So about 80% of our revenue comes from property taxes. At the same time that the teachers received the 6.1% increase based on the 2006 contract that we had signed, what was the CPI limited increase in our property tax revenue?
It was 0.1%. Now, the tax cap's been around for over 20 years. That's the lowest level in the history of the tax cap.
So another way of saying it, all right, what was the unfunded cost of the increase of our honoring our contract that we entered into with the teachers in 2006 in the fiscal year that just ended?
It was about $900,000.
So that we had to invade our fund balances by about $900,000 because there wasn't matching revenue for that.
Well, it was combinations. We had staff reductions. We had pay freezes. You've heard me talk at prior meetings where we've kicked the can down the road a little bit on some renovation projects that at some point will need to be done. Roofs wear out, carpet needs to be replaced, things like that. So it wasn't $900,000 out of reserves, but the value, yes, the value is a combination of things.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have
Monty?
a question for the team that's been working with the teachers to negotiate a new contract. What would be the impact on our finances under any of the proposals that the teachers have made to date?
Well, that's one of the problems right now is because every proposal to date would create a deficit in this year's budget. That would be the fourth budget in a row then in our operating funds, the ones that we pay the day-to-day expenses out of, we'd have a deficit. So we would be back into drawing down reserves or making further cuts. But it also has a compounding effect because that carries forward and that endangers future budgets.
You know, Alan, I want to supplement that a little bit by talking about reserves and a little bit about what that means compared to other school districts. Lake Forest historically has had the lowest tax rate in the state of Illinois. Currently, this year, it is the lowest tax rate in the state of Illinois. Property values are high, so our taxpayers do pay sizable tax bills. However, in comparison with other communities, and virtually any community surrounding us, whether it's Highland Park, Lincolnshire, Libertyville, Glencoe, Wilmette, Winnetka, Glenview, Northbrook, just every community. The typical tax bill in those communities is 70% of their taxes are the schools, either their elementary, the combination of their elementary and high schools. The Lake Forest tax rate being the lowest tax rate in the state, matched by District 67, by the way, which I believe is the third lowest tax rate in the state, means that instead of the tax bill to the average taxpayer being 70% devoted to schools, in our community in Lake Forest, it's 50%. That's significantly less of a total tax bill. Lake Bluff District 65 has a more typical tax rate of all the school districts around us. So for a Lake Bluff resident, their typical tax bill is more 60% range of their total tax bill as schools. In Lake Forest, it's 50%. Having said that, I think the philosophy of Lake Forest traditionally has also been to not build a big reserve. That rather, in fact, the money, rather than being held by the school district, is held by the taxpayer. So historically, and this is going back decades and decades, there's not been a big reserve in Lake Forest. That the money for schools is actually better held in the hands of the taxpayers themselves. So what does that mean? Stevenson High School has a reserve of about 30%, 40%. New Trier has a tax reserve against total budget, has a reserve of about 30%. That's pretty typical. There are Cook County school districts that have even higher percentages than that. Historically, we're in the 10% range. The board established a parameter 10 years ago that minimally the district needs to maintain 10% fund balance. Unfortunately, because of circumstance beyond the control of the school district, with the loss of significant revenue over the past 3 years, the district has tried to keep itself in balance for helping our students as much as possible by a combination of things that President Golden talked about. One of those is drawing down our reserve. So we've been doing negative budgets rather for several years now. And the continuation of that would be a catastrophe, a disaster. The state of Illinois actually rates every school district based on their fund balances, balanced budgets, and fund reserves. District 115's fund reserve has gotten precariously low. And it is the fiduciary responsibility of the district to not maintain that. That's just impossible to do. It actually cannot do that. It must find itself back to its 10% rule. So I wanted to add that to our community. It's a little different in Cook County. Fund reserves tend to be larger. But when I talk to my peer superintendents, superintendents from Evanston to here that are in Cook County, they maintain larger reserves because their county tax collection group is not as efficient. Cook County is not as efficient as Lake County is. Sometimes in some years, and it happens periodically, the Cook County will not distribute their taxes. Taxes are collected in June and in September until sometimes in January, the next January. That means the school districts have to run their budgets on reserve. We've never had to do that. Lake County has a very efficient office. The school districts, all the school districts of Lake County are dispersed their local property tax dollars in a very timely fashion. So it really hasn't been necessary to have 30, 40%, some cases 50% fund balances. The district's been very conservative. But on the other hand, in tight times like we're in right now, it creates a precarious position for the district. So what President Golden said was the board really has to find itself back to its 10% level. And I just thought I would share that. Alan, is there anything else that you would want to say about that?
Just say, you mentioned the state board, and on their website, they do monitor things like days cash on hand, and we're the lowest on the days cash on hand of any of our peers. They also have an expenditure to revenue ratio. For the last data reported, we're slightly over 1, which means we're spending more than we're taking in. That's not the case in a Stevenson or a New Trier.
What are the long-term implications of that? Does that make us look like an unstable school district in some way?
No, I'm going to go back because we're talking about an update to the community. And in 2006, when we settled the contract, because I was in the district and I was part of that, part of what we looked at was the new construction scheduled to come online. We were looking at Barra College. That was going to be a $100 million development. We were looking at the city selling the municipal center up by the grill on Laurel. That was 37 acres, I believe. We were looking at Amberley Woods. And the way the tax cap formula works, new construction the first year comes in outside the cap. All that evaporated. Amberley Woods didn't, but it slowed down dramatically.
Harrison House in Lake Bluff.
In Harrison House in Lake Bluff. So that $150 million worth of new construction evaporated. Well, that has a big impact on our main revenue source. In addition to that, we ended last year with the state owing us $450,000. We've seen interest rates go from 4% and 5% basically down to nothing. They're being held artificially low. Several years ago, we earned $1 million in interest earnings. This year, we're projecting about $70,000. So it's not just one thing that's happened. It's the downturn in the economy in the commitments we made in 2006, and then the economy turning in 2008. We talked about, John knows, with the Finance Committee in 2009, we knew we were going to have problems in 2011 just because of how things lined up, what you just talked about. So we've talked about a path to black. We talked about it being through staff reductions, cost containment. We have a TIF that's coming online in the next year or two, and we have to realign our expense, our main expense, which is our teacher's contract, with our revenue stream.
I guess what I'm getting at is that it's not just a nice thing to build your reserve back up, it's really essential, and that you can't just keep postponing it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, if the last couple of years have improved the need for reserves, I don't think they ever would have been there. You would have been cutting programs with meat cleavers a couple of years ago.
Yeah, let me say something about, if we had the fund balance, excuse me, the reserve we have right now, 2 years ago, we would have been taking our class sizes to 30. We would have been cutting many programs. But the board, against what the strategic parameter of the district is, 10%, chose to try to do a combination of reduction of total staff. We've cut about 30 positions in the district. It's about 8% of total workforce. All non-union related positions, every non-union person, that's about 150 people in the district, have had their salaries frozen. We've spent down the reserve. It's been a combination of those things that have helped us protect our students with their programs. Class size has gone up slightly, very, very slightly. I'm going to just give a ballpark example. We were at our historic level at Lake Forest High School, by the way, I can go back 20 years. Thor Benson can show us that data. Is about 21, 21 to 1 in a classroom. We dropped to about 19 and a half 3 years ago, which was good. Now we're up to about 21 again, 21.1, 21.0. We're back at our historic average. We're trying to avoid making it worse than that. That's one of the board's goals. So it's really a combination of all of those factors that allow us to get ourselves back into a sound financial footing here in the near future.
Alan, I have a question. I think Dick or Monty asked, what effect would the current union proposals have on our financial situation? Conversely, what would the board's proposals do? Are we working our way out of this, and how long would it take, do you think?
It would build back our reserves over 4 years. And that's what we've talked about, is doing that in measured steps, just as we made cuts over the last several years in measured steps. So it's been really a long-term approach.
Let me supplement that too. So the board's proposal is about restoring its balances to about the 10% level, and over a 4-year period, teachers would receive a little bit more than a 10% increase on average for all teachers over the 4-year period. The teacher proposal is year 1 would be 4%, year 2 would be another 4%, so somewhere between 8 and 9% in 2 years. That incremental difference doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot in terms of being able to avoid negative budgets in each of the, this year as well as next year. That's pretty significant.
Just to clarify, if I may, following up on that, Harry and Sharon and Alan. Alan, my understanding is that over 4 years, the board proposal gets us back to the very minimum target level, barely gets us back to the minimum target level. And that's your best calculation, is that right? I mean, it doesn't get us to the kind of numbers Harry was talking about, for instance, to other districts. 30.
Yeah, there's scores of assumptions in there, and we have to project out in future years what CPI may or may not be. There isn't a lot of margin for error, that's correct. But I think, you know, when we approach our projections, we don't approach them as sky is falling, nor do we put in what we hope to have happen. We try to read the tea leaves as best as we know right now. For example, the state owes us money. They ended the year owing us money. We don't think they're going to catch up this year, and I haven't built that in. But I haven't put in additional state cuts either. So we're trying to hold our own, and we stay in contact with legislators and with lobbyists about what is the thinking and what are we seeing down the road. Interest rates, I actually had to revise them down because I went into the last round of projections saying they can't keep staying down this low. And then the Fed a month later came out and said we're going to hold them down for 2 years. So as we get updated data, we make those adjustments and then, you know, extrapolate that out and kind of look at what that means. So there are scores of assumptions in there, but I think they're reasonable assumptions. And yes, it does slowly get us back. And it strikes a balance between addressing some capital needs, addressing employment, and rebuilding those reserves.
Yeah, but when you say get us back, it barely gets us back, as I remember, to the minimum target level that we've been talking about. And while we're talking about increases, what have you, I know that the proposed tax levy is going to come up later in the agenda tonight. But if you could just refresh our memory on what the estimate is from Lake County next year on assessed value of property on the rolls.
Well, Shields Township, we're projecting to go down about 6%, so we've applied that to the entire EAV. That has an impact on the tax rate. I think what's more telling here, when I came to the district in '06, annually you were getting about $40 million in new construction. That translates into the dollars translated from that are now less than half of what it used to be. So we went from about $400,000 a year in dollars from new construction to about $200,000 a year. And again, you add that on to what I've said about interest rates. It's not just in one area.
No, the purpose of my asking you to clarify that number again for everyone is just further evidence of the macroeconomic background here that we all face. Property values are assumed to be going down by 6% for next assessed year, so it just gives you a pretty good indication of the macro environment, that's all.
Yes.
One of the important things to remember about that, though, as you've said, the assessed value sets the denominator used to develop the rate. And I think it's probably important to note that baked into your forecasts over the next 4 years and actually occurring over the past 5 or 6 years and probably reaching beyond that have been literal increases in the amount of tax revenue that we have extended to existing property owners, correct?
Yeah, later on in the agenda is the tentative tax levy, and I'll show something up on the screen that shows that, and I'll talk about the process we use for trying to project what that amount is.
All right, I think at this point we're going to move on with our agenda. I want to thank you, Alan, for taking the hot seat once again. And but it's very informative, and you know, as a full board, we all have different questions, and we'd like to hear them answered, and hopefully for our audience and also for people watching tomorrow, that this has been very helpful. Thank you. So moving on, we have our report tonight, and that would be our Special Education Programs and NSSED report. Dr. Griffith?
Okay, Dr. Julie Cooley will give a brief update, board members, on a topic that's quite busy in our school district with activity for both students and teachers.
Good evening, board members, and thank you for allowing me to switch gears a little bit, although I would say that it's somewhat on topic as well. As you know, for about the last year and a half, we've been talking about our special education programs. We've been talking about our reliance on NSSED and looking at the programs within to see how we possibly could expand the programs within our district and reduce that reliance on NSSED. As you know, last January, we gave intent to potentially withdraw from NSSED, and if that should come into effect, that would be effective at the end of June. So we've kind of got a timeline in place related to that. So I thought I'd give you a little update as to where we are at. The two main areas that our students take part in NSSED programs are the Educational Life Skills Program, which is already located at Lake Forest High School, but it's run by NSSED staff, and then what is called the Transition Program, which is a program for students who are roughly age 18 through the age of 21. Those students have community-based program, and it's currently in Highland Park. So those are the two programs that make up the vast majority of our students, which is about 18 students that are in NSSED programs now are primarily in these programs. So we are on target to implement district programs in those two areas effective fall 2012. So some of the things that we've done so far is that we've engaged an expert consultant. She's actually recently retired from the NSSED transition program to help us plan that transition program. As I mentioned, the Educational Life Skills is already at Lake Forest High School, so we have a long history of knowing how that program works. District has supported that program in hundreds of ways over time, including the facilities, which are probably, I want to go on a little bit of a limb, but I don't think anyone will disagree, the finest facilities for an educational life skills program in the state of Illinois and beyond. I mean, it's just a beautiful facility for them. But the transition program will be new for us to learn to plan, and so we've engaged an expert on that. We're starting to work on the program staffing. Jen Knight has been very involved in that as Jennifer Hermes, and looking at that, we're getting very, very close to ready to post positions so that we can start to engage the individuals that will work with us in the fall actively on that. We'll be attempting to hire wherever possible from our current NSSED employees, and they've all shown interest in being with us, but we'll obviously do an open hiring process on that. We have a planning framework in place. I believe I included that in your board packet that kind of looks at the Educational Life Skills program and then how that morphs into a community-based program. So we're using that framework particularly on the transition program, and it mirrors what is currently done at NSSED. By the way, as I mentioned, NSSED, they're very, very active partners with us in all of this time of taking back programs. It's one of the things that they routinely do is to build capacity within any district. So they've been great partners with us, I'd have to say. Some of the other things that we've done, we've started looking and reviewing all the instructional materials that we'll need in the new program that we have in the existing program. We've looked at even the equipment needs. Will we need desks? Will we need cabinets? Things like that. I'll be submitting that to Principal Hoffman very soon so that he can look in his storerooms to see what help he'll find there. We've looked at the assistive technology needs, which are extensive in that program. So we've got things like augmentative communication devices, things like switches, computer programs, a lot of things like that. So we've already engaged, actually Cornelius has been involved to a certain degree. We're going to start to ramp that up this year and being in charge of those kinds of things. We've also looking at the community locations. We have a desired location. We'll see if that one works out. I won't quite say that tonight because I hope it'll work out, but we're looking for locations that would make easy access to the downtown area so that students can learn to use the public transportation, meaning the train that would be available to them. Locations for vocational employment, the library, Lake Forest College, which we hope to expand. We've got some great partnerships with Lake Forest College now, and we hope to expand those in a dozen different ways, and I've been in contact with them personally, and our consultant will help with that too. We hope to have many, many more vocational opportunities at the college. We hope to have some maybe even domestic activities. We've had the idea that perhaps our students would learn to do laundry alongside of a college mentor. Maybe that'll work, maybe that won't, now that I just said that out loud. But a lot of different links with the college that could go very well. And lastly, related to all the program planning, we do have a parent advisory committee. As you know, they met publicly here in this room a couple of times, and some of you were present at that time. A larger group, and then we've had a smaller group who's met on a regular basis. We've met with them one time this year and are planning to meet with them again soon. They give us valuable feedback along the journey and have become great partners, I think, with us in this process. The NSSED Finance Committee, I think that you know that I sit on that committee now, and they Marilyn Harlow used to be our representative there. When she went off the board, it was suggested that perhaps I could stay involved with that and kind of making sure we're really in the know on things that are going on, because NSSED is actively trying to look at their billing. They're doing a billing study. They're looking at their tuitions. They're looking at the true cost of programs, because they realize not only our districts are having a problem with the infrastructure at NSSED, but others are as well. So we're staying on top of that. They are going to suggest some major changes. We'll be working through that very heavily in November, but they will have to get the approval of all 18 member districts. So it's quite a process, and as you know, that we have a process with our own board, and when you put 18 board members together and their superintendents and their business managers, it is a quite extensive process, but they're willing to work through that. We should have the drafts and potentially in December, but for sure in January. I think at that time we'll know what our relationship is going to be like with NSSED. And there are many versions of relationships that have been discussed. We'll just have to wait and see how these other things work out, though, before we know exactly how that's going to look. So that's kind of the information that it is actually all the information that I've presented for you tonight, although you do have some backup documents in your packet. So are there any questions at this time?
Julie, a lot of questions had been raised, especially early on in this process, about what our ongoing relationship with NSSED would be, could be, can be. I think a lot of people were wanting some kind of assurance that NSSED resources would still be available to us as needed. Can you address that?
NSSED has always had relationships with non-members, so if it went to the extreme, which would be we are a non-member, we would assume that they would continue to have a relationship with us. They have long-standing relationships, as an example, with Evanston High School. In fact, a large portion of their enrollment at North Shore Academy are students from Evanston. They've also had long-standing relationships with Stevenson, who are members of CEDAL, because they're on the fringe and can access programs. So they've always had those relationships, but those relationships are always dependent on board approval. So we would have to go through that same kind of approval process should we not become a member. Now, if we continue to stay a member, then that's obvious that we'll have access to things.
When you say board approval, do you mean the NSSED board?
That's correct. The NSSED board would have to approve if they were going to extend their services to us as a non-member.
And if we do end up bringing the transition program in-house, what will happen to the students who are currently in the transition program and who are receiving services in Highland Park?
Mm-hmm. The IEP process, so their individualized educational plan, their team will meet and make a decision on that. There is a student that could potentially stay even if we left as membership. I think that all of the adults would understand that, and I assume that that message would get across to the board that the student is very close to graduation, and his program is so unique that it would probably make sense. But we would do that on a case-by-case basis with every student. And I think that our initial feedback, though, is our families are interested in having their kids transition into Lake Forest. And when you think about it, if they wait till the day they're 22, they'll probably be accessing some kind of activities at a minimum here in Lake Forest. So if they did that transition 6 months earlier or a year earlier, it gets them to that point with support rather than having all the supports in Highland Park. So I think we're going to be open and flexible, and I believe that NSSED, has the best interests of students at heart too.
Some people have expressed concern about the fact that for some of these vulnerable young people, just the change itself is very disruptive. But I think you make a good point that at age 22, they're going to be experiencing a very big change regardless, and so maybe to do it a little bit earlier when there is staff to help them with that transition could really be beneficial. Thanks.
That's exactly right. Any other questions?
Julie, if you bring these two programs in-house, what demands would you have, or what need would you have for the NSSED going forward? Is it just the North Shore Academy, and perhaps this one student you're talking about, or would there be something else that you might need them for?
Well, we would continue, if we continue a relationship of some kind, we'd continue to use the professional development opportunities that they offer. Those go beyond just our special ed population. Occasionally we'll have other staff that want to learn more about the reading programs or variety of things they offer. So certainly the professional development. Our parents participate in parent activities through a whole series of events that are held for parents, particularly some of those parents that are going to need a lot of help understanding the adult services. So we would continue to access that. NSSED makes available consultants from time to time. I know with one of the programs at the high school now, we contact Dr. Bolton, the principal of North Shore Academy, and he'll either come out and work with our staff or give us advice. So there are a lot of collaborative kinds of activities that would continue. And, we wouldn't rule out, needing another program perhaps in the future. So that would all be available to us.
And if we withdrew, could we still access those programs on a fee basis? The parents' activities, some of the other
I would assume so.
services you talked
I would
about?
assume so, yes. And in addition to that, Steve Johnson and I have relationships with the other high school directors in Highland Park, Deerfield, so forth. And so we regularly collaborate on a variety of things that sometimes include NSSED and sometimes they don't. So those relationships would continue for the benefit of our students and families as well.
Do you have your next meeting with the Parent Advisory Committee set up at this time? Are you able to tell us when that'll be?
We do not have that date set, but it will definitely be before the winter break, likely within the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Any other questions, board members? Dr. Cooley, thank you very much. Very thorough as always. Okay, next on our agenda, we have the board committee reports, and I will start with the Board Education Committee. Nikki Snoblin.
The Education Committee met on Wednesday, November 2nd, and the only thing on our agenda was to kind of have a dry run of the assessment report that was presented by Dr. Cooley and Thor Benson. Went through all of the ACT and the Prairie State results and a number of other assessment measures. I'm not going to go into any detail on that tonight because the board will get the full report in December. I will just say that we received our packet in advance so that we could look at the validity of the comparisons that were being made, the usefulness of the statistics that were being presented. We feel like they gave us a really good draft. We made some suggestions that, perhaps will help with a little bit of refinement, and I think we're going to have a really good report in December. The Education Committee does not have another meeting set up. I know in January we're anticipating doing a workshop to start the goal-setting process, and we'll play it by ear and see if anything else comes up between now and then that we need to meet about, but at this time nothing else is scheduled. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Nikki. Next, we have our Board Operations Committee report. Dick Block.
Thank you. The Board Operations Committee actually met yesterday morning, November 7th at 8 a.m. We also had a pretty singular focus, Nikki, being the booster project at East Campus and a review of all of its implications from an operational standpoint, with particular focus on what we do now that would no longer be necessary as that project goes forward, and what would be necessary to support those new facilities once they were installed. And then lastly, additional revenue opportunities that those new facilities, meaning the 2 turf fields, new stands, that sort of thing, may provide for us. We also discussed our ongoing maintenance needs. I know the board has heard us talk about this before, but our storage needs are becoming, or our storage availability is getting to the acute level stage, and regardless of what happens with the booster project in terms of its scope and how large it may be, we're going to need to address maintenance storage issues, fuel storage issues at East Campus in any event. So it's a continuing topic of discussions with the Operations Committee, and I just wanted to remind you of that again. We asked a number of things of the administration there to get back to us with some further information, again, on costs that could be avoided, revenues that could be generated, those kinds of things associated with the booster project. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 22nd at 8 a.m. at East Campus, and again, as always, other board members and the public are invited to attend. Thank you. Todd, do you have anything you'd like to add? Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Now we have our Board Finance Committee report. John Scribner.
President Golan, the Board Finance Committee met on Tuesday, October 25th at 7:30 in the morning. And it was it was a joint session with the District 67 Finance Committee, and the sole purpose of the meeting was to hear Alan's presentation on the tentative tax levy. And having heard that presentation, which we're about to hear once again, we recommend that the tax levy be adopted that Alan will be presenting. And we did not schedule a future meeting.
Okay, thank you, John. In terms of other committees, just to mention that District 67 Board of Education and the District 115 Board of Education members have gotten together. We've put together 3 subcommittees that are studying all of the issues surrounding our hiring of a new superintendent and the information that we want to have ready as we move along with the search, which is underway and we're pleased with. Next week, President Wold and I will be meeting with the consultants. They've asked to see us to go into next steps, but we should have a lot more to report at our December meeting, but that is moving along. Thank you. Now we have our action items. The first is the adoption of the 2011 tentative tax levy. Dr. Griffith?
Okay, board members, well, this is an important annual event. This is not the actual action item itself on your tax levy, but rather its presentation, and Alan Albus will walk us through the specifics. Alan?
Thank you. Annually, the board is asked to consider and adopt a tax levy. Now, a tax levy is a request for property taxes to fund the school year that starts next July. And while the board can levy or in quote, ask for any amount it wants, the amount it will actually receive is limited by a calculation in the Property Tax Extension Limitation Act. So the way it works is that if you ask for an amount that is equal to or above what the formula will produce, the formula knocks it back down to simply the yield from the formula. If you ask for an amount that is less than what the formula produces, then you're given the lesser of the two amounts. And that's not a one-time event. The problem with that is every year is predicated on what you received the prior year. So if you under-levy, that not only impacts this budget, but all budgets going forward.
Without voter approval?
Yes.
Throw that in.
Or until you run a referendum.
You can always levy more with voter approval.
Until you run a referendum and pass a referendum, that's correct. So in your packet, there are 2 sheets attached to the cover memo, and I'd like to walk through those for the moment and explain our recommendation. I left out one of the components of the formula is the amount of new construction that has occurred in the district. That figure won't be released until next spring, usually around March. So everything we're doing is based on a projection, but usually we've been very, very close on this. So we have a pretty good handle on what this means. So if you look at the second page in your packet, I'm going to jump down to revenue from existing property, which is at about that second grouping of numbers there. And the first number shows our 2010 extension, and then the way the formula works, bonds are treated separately, and I won't go into that tonight. But the 2010 extension less the bond and interest was $31,268,410. In the next grouping of numbers, you'll see a 1.5%. That's called the CPI, and that is a number that comes out every December. It gets released in January, and that drives the formula for our revenue going forward. So the 1.5% figure is a known number. That came out last January. So the formula looks at the extension we received last year, and it increases it by 1.5%, and then says that's the amount of increase that you can get from existing property. So from that, then you calculate a tax rate, and then you add in any new construction. So the shaded area on there, after working through all of that, is what we project our extension to be for 2011, less the bonds, inclusive of any new construction. And then the percent increase you can see is a 2% increase. Now, again, because we don't know what the new construction number is, what we typically prepare and recommend is a levy that's slightly more than this. So again, we anticipate receiving $31.9 million. If you look at the recommended 2011 column and come down to the shaded area, though, what we're recommending that you levy is $32.2 million. For that figure to not capture all the new construction that occurs in the district, we would have to have had about $45 million of new construction. So we kind of work backwards to kind of test this and see where we're at. The other reason we would recommend levying an amount that's higher than this is we haven't developed next year's budget. As we go to develop it, this gives us a little more flexibility in how we allocate tax revenue among funds. So we spent, probably a good 45 minutes on this, I think, in the Joint Finance Committee meeting, really drilling down on the formula, walking through it, talking about what past figures had been, and both committees recommended the tentative levies as approved. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the process now of the levy going forward as well. At least 20 days before adopting a final levy, a governmental entity has to adopt a tentative levy. So there are 20 days between this meeting and your December meeting. So we meet the statute in that requirement. Further, any levy that is adopted then has to be filed by the last Tuesday in December. If the final levy that the board approves exceeds 105% of the prior year, then that triggers what's called the Truth in Taxation Act, and you have to have a hearing and publish a notice in the newspaper. Based on the numbers that we're seeing with the CPI and new construction, we're not near the 5%. We don't need to ask for that. So we'd ask that you adopt a tentative levy tonight as presented. In December, we'd ask that you adopt a final levy. Once that's done, then you can't raise the levy from that point. But from December to March, you can choose, if you want, to lower the actual amount levied. And that's simply how the process works in the state. May I answer any questions?
I just kind of wanted to reiterate my earlier point that despite 6% reductions in existing property values, the tax burden in aggregate that existing property owners from last year will have next year as a result of this is up almost $500,000, right?
Yes.
And I raise it not because I recognize the financial situation we're in and the need to restore our reserves, and simply raise it to point out that this process is one that allows us to increase our tax burden in dollars. The rate will fluctuate based on where the actual property values go, but in dollars, the taxes that a family who owned property last year will pay next year is going up. I think in the community there's some sense that because my home is worth less than it was last year, my tax bill will go down, and that's simply not the case. And I know there's some communication out there among all the vitriol that's been in the media and the electronic media over the last week or so that there are no tax burden changes anticipated with any of the negotiations, and that's simply not the case either. So this is a continuation of a process that the law allows us to do. It probably since 2006, when the expired contract went into place, to today, the real dollar tax burden of the existing property owners has increased by, after this, close to 20%. Is that?
I would have to go back and add up the CPIs over those times, but I'm sure you're
while
probably close.
On a year-by-year basis, we've talked a little bit about this, the incremental change to a homeowner with an average home value of $700,000. It might be $25 this year, but it's $25 compounding on $25 last year, and so on down the line. So this is a real dollar burden on the entire tax-paying community.
Yeah, if I could take an opportunity to touch on something you addressed, there is a perception out there that my house value went down, therefore my taxes should go down. And that is not how the formula works, because what the formula does is look at the aggregate extension. And that would be true if the value of your house went down, but everybody else stayed equal. If everybody drops equally, the tax rates simply go up. Now, because of that conception, there was legislation introduced in Springfield to make the formula work just like that. If the AAV drops, there is no increase in the extension. That was brought up in the veto session today. That was voted down because of the impact it would have on not just school districts, but all forms of local governments. It would have a very detrimental impact. Now, that doesn't mean that won't come back in the spring. But you're right, there is a conception out there. So when I talk about 1.5%, that's in the aggregate. And so what happens to each of us individually as homeowners is very dependent on what happens to the value of our house in relationship to everybody else.
Yeah, but just to further Todd's point, in the aggregate, not only are tax burdens going up individually, when you couple that with the decrease in assessed value, tax rates are going up at a compounded rate, compounded by the increase in absolute dollar tax burden and the decrease in assessed value. We talked earlier about the estimate that assessed values will be decreased by 6% next year. Equalized assessed value is a third of fair market value. That translates, just so everybody knows, within just the Lake Forest High School district to about $600 million of property value eliminated from the rolls year to year. So it's a, you know, when you look at it in terms of tax rate, it's a particularly onerous situation when housing values are decreasing.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel old because I remember the days when the rate is really what drove everything in the formula, and now it's the end product. You're right.
Back calculated at the end once the absolute dollars are determined by individual taxing bodies like ourselves, and when property values are determined by the assessors.
Okay, any other questions, board members? Then may I have a motion to approve the 2011 tentative levy?
I'll move that the Board of Education approve the adoption of the 2011 tentative levy as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any other questions or comments? May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Block?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mr. Bergner?
Aye.
Mr. Scribner?
Aye.
Mrs. Golan?
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we have the approval of the Human Resources Report. Dr. Griffith?
Okay, board members, you might recall last month I attempted to start this report myself, only to discover that we had an expert sitting in the audience for us. So once again, I'd like to reintroduce for you Jen Knight, who is helping us at Lake Forest High School on personnel. Jen, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, and I am very happy I didn't have to wear the neon colors or the sequins to get your attention today. As you see, the report is primarily housekeeping issues, which is a pretty nice place to be in November. A couple other additional pieces, though, just as informational. We have begun to collaborate some with the business office to look at how our existing software for Business can also serve some human resources function. We're looking at the possibility of uploading our certification data. Really, it will be more efficient in creating reports for the state, and also will allow individual teachers to see when certification is up, what they have there. Right now, we're really investigating what are the capacities, what kind of spreadsheets do we need to create in order to get it done, and how do we match up with the state. But that is a pretty exciting possibility to move forward and ultimately look at what other human resources data can we pull into technology resources we already have on hand. Another piece that is professional development related, last Wednesday, Dr. Wendy Mogul came in. We had an ongoing tri-district book club with both elementary districts and the high school, hosted at the high school. 32 participants, focusing on her 2 books. She has 2 books, Blessings of a Skin Knee and Blessings of a B-, both focused on what you can probably guess from the title, the upside of failure or not success, which is an easier term to swallow. We had the three meetings for the book club with all different participants from the 3 districts, and ultimately when Wendy Mogul came in, she led a book club final meeting for our teachers, really focused on what is it to be a teacher, how can you most effectively support students in growing up into being individuals, making their own decisions, and on occasion making their own mistakes. She followed that up with a presentation for 500 parents approximately, in which she directly drew from the feedback and thoughts of our faculty and 2 students that actually introduced her. So that we are very proud of. That is our 13th KTI or Kessler Teacher Institute for this fiscal year, the 2011-2012 fiscal year. So we are happy to report that even though it's still relatively new in the calendar year, we have had a robust offering. So thank you and good night.
Thank you, Jen. Board members, any questions? Okay, thank you very much. May I have a motion to approve the Human Resources Report?
I move that the Board of Education approve the Human Resources Report as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Bergner?
Aye.
Mr. Block?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Scribner?
Aye.
Mrs. Golan?
Aye. Motion carries. Now we have the consent agenda, and if there's any item on the agenda that a board member would like to have removed, they can do so at this time. Seeing none, the consent agenda includes, number 1, the approval of the financial report and schedule of checks written. Number 2, the approval of minutes of a regular meeting from October 11th, 2011. Minutes of an executive session, October 11th, 2011. Release of executive session minutes, April through September 2011. Acceptance of hearing officer's report and approval of settlement agreement. And the destruction of audio recordings from December 7th, 2009. May I have a motion to approve?
I move that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mr. Bergner?
Aye.
Mr. Scribner?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Block?
Aye.
Mrs. Golan?
Aye. Motion carries. This past month, we had only 2 FOIA requests. The first was from Nancy Thorner at nancycello1@comcast.net, and the second was from Nancy Thorner, address nancycello@comcast.net. Oops, nancycello1@comcast.net. Announcements. On Thursday, November 10th, there are parent-teacher conferences and no school. Friday, November 11th is Veterans Day, no school. Wednesday to Friday, November 23rd to 25th, Thanksgiving break, no school. And our next regular meeting will be Tuesday, December 6th, here in the Lake Forest High School West Campus boardroom. May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.